So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Chiodini, our esteemed financial advisor, who can talk a little bit more about what do you do with these tools? So how do you make a plan? Since special needs trusts and ABLE accounts are tools, Michael can talk a little bit about the umbrella, which is the plan, the overall plan.
Introduce myself real quick. My name is Michael Chiodini, and I've been a financial advisor since 2000. So I guess, man, 22 years, half my life at this point. And along my journey, about 7 years into it, I had a son who came into my life with a disability. He had a heart defect, and after open heart surgery, had a cardiac arrest. And Dylan was with us for 15 years. I lost him last year in June. And through that, as a financial advisor, I kind of woke up one day like, well, what do I do? How do I plan for his future? Knowing that tomorrow's not promised to any of us, what's the right way to go about this? And, I started knocking on the doors of other people in my industry, even attorneys that did wills and trusts, and didn't really have a lot of faith in finding people that knew what to do. And so I took it upon myself that time to learn and understand, how do I plan for the future of my son in case I'm not here? And in that realm, I'll jump into a little bit about tonight, what we've learned. And I think just as a parent, as a caregiver, as an advocate, what are the next steps that we take in trying to kind of build this plan and build the right situation to kind of insulate them financially and personally and for the best quality of life for their future. And I think this gets a good start here. So the first thing I think of is creating a letter of intent. And we'll talk a little bit about what that is here in a moment. I also think it's important that people create a future financial need. So your loved one's needs are different depending on their age, the level of disability, the resources that are already around them that are in kind or family supports. And then how do we look at what services that are going to be provided through Medicaid, through SSI, through Medicare, and then from there, where are the gaps? What do we need to fill? And then how much is that going to cost? Right. And so it's important to do. I think it's super important that families, they complete their own estate plan. Sometimes I'll see families run out and they'll draft just a special needs trust, but nothing else. They won't do any other kind of personal estate planning. And I'm sure the attorney was wanting them to do that. But it's important that you have the full estate plan completed. I mentioned earlier here, establishing a special needs trust through a will or through your own family trust and or as a standalone trust. There's different ways to do it. And so exploring those with your attorney and understanding what's important for your family and what's best for your family is what design is suited for what you're trying to accomplish with all of your goals. Funding a special needs trust with life insurance and other assets. There was a study done once by the ARC of the United States that 90% of money sitting in a special needs trust came from the proceeds of life insurance. And I think that makes sense because if families are growing their wealth and trying to protect their income and their net worth and their future goals, life insurance becomes a critical component to that. And we find a lot of times those are funding vehicles that fund life insurance into a special needs plan. The other thing is actually naming the special needs trust that you've created or the estate plan that you've created as the beneficiary. So oftentimes families will leave an attorney's office with a to-do list. And one of those to-do lists is to change the beneficiary or the POD or TOD on all of their personal assets to the trust. And they failed to do that. And so all that legal work that was done and time spent was for naught, because if they didn't do the actual transfer of the titling, none of those assets find their way to the trust and end up in probate. We don't want that. And then lastly is reducing the taxable estate. We don't find this quite as much anymore. As Vivek mentioned earlier, the estate tax is about $13 million per family. So we don't see that planning as much anymore, but if it comes down or if those change in the future, when I got into the business in 2000, it was $500,000 per person. And if you didn't do any estate planning, it was 500,000 for your family. So those can come very fast with just a term life insurance policy and some assets and a retirement account and a home. So really quick, I'll talk about the letter of intent. My biggest thing about the letter of intent truly is trying to kind of vision what a day in the life of your loved one is like. And so for Dylan, we kind of did a little videotape of what it's like in his life from the day he wakes, the moment he wakes up, throughout the day, from changing him to bathing him to getting him in and out of his sander and his wheelchair and his other fun things that he loved to do, and even into the van and out to horse therapy and just kind of what we expect folks to do in the event that we're not here. And you know, God forbid it would have happened. But I think every day in his life, like just making certain that I could give him the best quality of life. And what does other people need to know? Irrelevant of the legal documents or the money that I leave, I need to really have a kind of a game plan of a manual, if you would, of how to just provide for him in the daily routines that we've done. And then really just talk about the family and friends that you want involved in their life. The hopes and the dreams and aspirations you have for them, and things that I looked at for Dylan was continuing his horsemanship therapy out at Treehouse in Wentzville. He really enjoyed that. That was probably his favorite activity. He really enjoyed aquatic therapy. And so those are things that, you know, maybe other people that you're looking to step into this role, if God forbid this happens, they wouldn't know that unless you provided them a platform or a videotape or an audio tape or a written document that said, this is what we want for their future, and this is what we want for their living arrangements. These are the types of supports that we expect for them or that they're going to need. And this is the type of end of life planning that we want, where we want them buried, what kind of funeral we want, what we want those arrangements to be like. And it's one of the hardest things that a family has to go through. But I actually think it's the beginning of your plan, because if you don't know, and if you haven't explored what those needs look like, and if you haven't created kind of that lifestyle that you want for them, it becomes very hard as a planner for us to come up with the financial side, right? And so what we're trying to do is understand what you want that lifestyle to look like, what you can expect from the financial resources through the social service infrastructure that's already out there. And there's going likely to be a gap. There's going to be hours of the day that aren't going to be met, that you're not going to be able to find people, or there's not enough hours that are allotted. And so those are things that we have to take into consideration. And then also looking at what their income is. Do they get SSI? Do they switch to SSDI because they were a disabled adult child and now will go on mom and dad's work history? Will they have earned income from employment? Right? And then what their expenses look like from a living expense. The examples I like to use is, you know, if Dylan in our planning, if we were content with the idea of him just living at a facility that's Medicaid paid for, likely something like Pony Bird, which is a wonderful facility, the cost would have been a lot less, because a lot of those Medicaid service costs would have been taken care of, that personal care attendant hours, that housing, his SSI would have been forfeited. But we would have had fewer outside expenses, except our plan was to keep him in our home, right? And so we have electricity bills that have to be paid, and property taxes and upkeep, and individuals that have to come in. And so that lifestyle costs more money. And so trying to create a plan and trying to help a family kind of walk through, what are those income resources? What are those expenses? What does that lifestyle look like that you're trying to plan for? And how do we come up with a number that fits for what you're trying to accomplish? So once we come up with that number, we look at what we can use to fund it. You know, what are the assets that we're going to have left over, or that we can earmark to be there to fund that trust. And so in some cases, families have the ability to save enough money for their own retirement, and then they have enough money for the next generation's retirement, for Joey's retirement in that case. And so anything from cash and CDs, anything you have a titleable asset, from cars to property, real estate, to individual brokerage accounts and investments, all of those things can be owned and or left as a funding vehicle into the special needs trust. What we have found is most of the time families, life insurance becomes a tool. Ideally, because it happens at the most opportune time, right? When mom and dad are both not here, we need to make sure there's enough money in that trust to take care of all the needs that the child ever is going to have, irrelevant of when it happens. And so we use those tools on occasion. They're tax-free. They're immediately accessible. I mean, death benefits are usually paid out within days or weeks. And oftentimes it's structured right. They're outside of the court process of what's called probate. And so that's very, very important. As it's noted here on the slide, there's a unique type of life insurance that we use a lot of times called joint survivorship. It's where it insures two people on one policy. And the death benefit is only paid out once both people have died. So it's kind of like, we've saved enough money for retirement, we have enough for each other, but oh my gosh, what happens if something happens to the both of us? We need to make sure there's enough money there when we're both gone if we spend through the assets that we've saved for retirement. So we see that quite often. And a lot of times an exercise that we take families through, this is a quick little slide that I slid into here, is what we try to do is gauge the longevity of the life expectancy of the individual and pair that up with what income and expenses that they have throughout their life. And so one of the software programs, what we do is we use the example as if mom and dad died today, how much money would need to be there in order to accomplish all of the goals that you have set out for your child's lifestyle and their quality of life, including those Medicaid services. Looking at all of those pieces, we can really come up with a number and give families an idea of what does that look like, what is the plan. And I think the letter of intent is a critical piece to that, and trying to map out that future plan as to how do we give the best quality of life to our loved one, based on our situation and our unique goals and objectives. And so lastly, I'll talk a little bit about long-term care. This comes up more and more lately with families and caregivers. The concern I have is that if we build this plan and we don't discuss or at least address the potential of something happening to you, mom and dad, the caregivers, the one that's there making all of the choices and decisions for the child, what happens if we haven't given enough planning to what happens if something happens to you? And so long-term care is a conversation that needs to be addressed. There's many different ways to pay for it, self-funding it through different tools that are insurance tools that exist out there. But I look at it as my worry is that two things. If the idea is mom and dad and the loved one, the child with a disability, are going to live together forever, and something medically happens to mom and dad and they can no longer live independently, what's the game plan? Because they could go two different places, and we have to discuss that. My other concern is if the assets that we've earmarked to fund that trust are now susceptible to care needs for the mom or for the father, that could be a drain on the amount of assets that we've intended to leave to the next generation. So something that we found in our family's conversation is, what do we do and how do we plan for long-term care? And, it's a conversation we talk about. But I think for most families, the most common mistake I see is just failing to plan. And so tonight, I think one of the things that we as the presenters would like to give to you and SLARC is to begin this process of planning, whether it's getting with the attorneys, getting with Midwest Special Needs Trust, starting with a letter of intent, calling our office, getting with Ann over at the SLARC Foundation, and just really kind of understanding what you want that to look like. And then don't start adding money into assets that are countable resources like 529 plans and UTMI accounts. If you already created them, I understand that we can work on fixing it, but I think stopping new money going in is important and kind of dealing with the situation there now. And then lastly, I think is just, start thinking of those people. If you have people in your life, and we certainly have things to talk about if you don't. But those individuals that you would look to be an involved individual in either the assets and the management of money or the individual care, if it's something like a guardianship of some nature, where you're looking at who are those people in our life that surround your loved one and that would be willing and step up to the plate and that are trustworthy. The word trustee of a trust is the root of the word is trust, right? So someone that you believe is going to do the right thing. We don't have trust police running around overlooking their shoulder. There are things and mechanisms with the attorney that you can build into your legal document to have other eyes looking in. But at the end of the day, it's really about looking to the individuals in your loved one's life that truly you can trust to do the right thing.
So where can I get a letter of intent? And I'll let you answer that, but I'll also say that the St. Louis Arc has samples.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say, the more the better. So I've found that the St. Louis Arc and the Arc of the United States both have great letter of intent resources. We have one that we hand out to families when they come to visit with us. That was kind of a collaborative effort with Next Steps for Life out of Jefferson County. So we're more than happy to share that with families as well.
And the next question, which I can open to everyone, but how do you ask family to get involved either for care or as trustees? That's a big ask. Any tips on how to ask? And I think it depends on what you're asking them to do, and you have to be very clear. But Michael, I'll let you answer that as well.
Yeah, I walked in those shoes, so I do understand that a little bit. Having the conversation, I think, is super important. I don't know that I can help you as to how you bring it up. One of the things that we do is we provide a family a letter that they can give out to their loved ones after they've created a special needs trust to let them know, here, if you have any intentions to do something for our loved one, don't disrupt the benefits and the infrastructure that we've created to help them access state and federal resources. So please leave it in this way. But I think it's really just about kind of that conversation. I always kind of say the joke. It happened at Thanksgiving for me, where my brother was across the room and he kind of said, "Hey, I think we're gonna take you and Debbie off as the guardians for our kids because of Dylan and Robbie and just so much you have going on in your life. I think it would be more appropriate if Lisa, her sister-in-law, was that person." And I totally agreed. And I was like, yeah, I can understand that. And then before I could kind of finish, he says, well, what are you doing for Dylan? And I started to answer, and before I could answer, my brother says, "Hey, I love Dylan. I would be there for him. I would do as much as I can to support your family." He goes, "But I could never do what you do every day." Right? So he brought it up. Maybe that can help you. But for me, it was really comforting to know ahead of time that, even though I knew that he wasn't the one, that he was actually admitting to that. Yeah, this is not something that I'd be good to do. Now, managing the trust and managing the money and making sure that people aren't stealing from Dylan, he'd be great for that. Maybe too overbearing, but I think my suggestion would be letting them know that you're doing planning to support and to really build a good quality of life around your loved one, your child with a disability. And that in doing so, you have these certain roles that you have to find folks that they would be willing to play and have that conversation. I think about money, and I think about people that are good with finances or just detail oriented. Engineers, accountants tend to do well with that. They're going to take care of money. But when it comes to taking care of the person, that's not always the same person. You're looking for someone who has heart and compassion and willing to sacrifice lot of their life, for that journey to care for your loved one. And so I think there are two different roles. I do think the letter of intent process that questionnaire brings families through and can help you maybe identify who in our life would fit these different roles, and then approaching them, I think in maybe some of those fashions. I hope I have helped.
I think too, just that's something that we work with families on as well. And I think just putting together a circle of all the people that are in that person's life and what each of them might bring to the table, and see where your gaps are.
Yeah.
And that's something we can help you plan around as well. But I agree with Michael, that letter of intent, knowing everything that is needed can help you figure things out as well. And then you know what to ask for.
Yeah.
And I will add that there are the times where you maybe don't want your family as to take care of your loved one, right? Or you maybe really love your sister, but your brother-in-law is another story. And so Midwest Special Needs Trust documents kind of allow for you to line that up exactly the way you want it, with also the option of having nobody listed, and Midwest Special Needs Trust doing it ourselves with your loved one and their support, whether it be through the group home or facility. So yeah, in some instances, family's not the best option. We doesn't mean we want you to pick the next door neighbor either, because they're not always the best option either. But we've all of us here have terrible stories of co-trustees and trustees that just didn't work out. And so yeah, it's a careful decision, but with Midwest Special Needs Trust, there is the option where we can do it by ourselves and not have anybody listed. So I wanted to throw that out there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the advantages. And I think, again, whether they're the guardian, the caretaker, the trustee, the payee, there's many different roles that people can take on. Sometimes you just want someone who's going to come by once a month and take your loved one out to dinner once you're gone, to maintain a relationship. So you just never know. You have to decide what it is you want.
Hey, Bavik, I've seen a question about who can fire the trustee if they're not doing their job. I'd love to hear your answer.
In terms of that question, it's going to depend on how it's drafted. And that's part of why drafting documents is so critical. You need to, if you want the flexibility of oversight for your trustee, build in a provision that allows for, and then whatever, right? Allows for a committee that you're picking to oversee the trustee, to allow the beneficiary's guardians to remove the trustee. The key to anything is we are never going to hit the target. We're never going to hit bullseye on day one, but these documents need to be incredibly flexible and live with you for 30, 40, 50 plus years. And it needs to be able to do whatever your family needs it to do at some future point. And so, the best answer I got is these trustees owe a duty to the beneficiaries. If they screw that up, they can go to court. No one wants to go to court. So you got to provide better options for them, either a oversight committee, so to speak, or just the ability for a guardian of Joey to remove and replace, or whatever the case may be. And then there's a couple of questions in here about Joey's home and cost around Joey's home, and property tax and maintenance and stuff like that. And I want to be very clear. I do not think it's the best strategy, the most proactive approach for Joey to own a home. So let me just start there. If Joey does own a home, then Joey is responsible for all the upkeep for his home. A special needs trust owning his home, a third party special needs trust owning his home, which I do think is a better approach than Joey owning the home. Then the special needs trust is responsible for those costs and care. And then when we talk about what to put in the shoebox, as Michael brought up, I mean, you might want to think about how funds are going to be used for some of the upkeep on the house. And so it follows the owner is the best way I can answer it universally. But I felt it the need to say, I don't think it's ideal that Joey owns the house unless you're reacting to a situation. Do you pay the trustee? Depends. Well, why don't you answer the question first? I think
We do. So our services, there is a fee associated with it. And if that's something that you're interested in, it's posted on our website, full disclosure on what all of our fees are, as well as you can email me and I can run some numbers for you. So, but
And
yes,
then-
there is a fee.
Yeah, and then we talked about trustee selection. So if you name a professional trustee that's not Midwest, like a bank, they are going to charge a fee. It's usually a pretty big fee, and they usually aren't going to serve in that role unless there's significant assets in the trust, which then leaves you to the third option, which is individuals. Whether it's family members managing other family members' money, what could go wrong? Or just family members or friends or whatever. And it's all over the place on that, to be honest with you. Some family members choose not to get paid. And other family members do choose to get paid. So it's usually in the documents, we encourage you to put some language that says they're entitled to some reasonable compensation, but then let them sort of sort through it and decide. And then another question is there a trust too small or too large for Midwest Special Needs Trust?
So our minimum balance is $500. So technically, no, not too small, and no upper limit on any trust. I wanted to add to the fee question. So if you're having family members serve as co-trustees, our documents allow for them to be paid as well. So your family can decide, the donors can decide if they want their family members paid as co-trustees or not. So another way to talk about that, but no upper limit on the amount of trust, and the minimum balance is 500. So.
On non-Midwest Special Needs Trust, I do think there's a practicality level at some point. There is no minimum per se, but if it's all going to be family ran, then really any amount is probably fine. But if you're starting to go into corporate trustees or banks or stuff like that, it's all over the place. Some of them are maybe as low as 50 or 100,000, but that's a rare. They're usually about $1 million or higher if you're going to go bank route, corporate trustee, for what it's worth.
I want to thank our panelists for being here this evening and for all of your wonderful question answering and your expertise. It's always a pleasure. And I look forward to working with everyone in the future.